What have you seen by Pennsylvania early ballots in your area?
Yeah, so we are seeing all of those commercials and the incredible amount of money that's poured in to the Pittsburgh market. I think at some point voters, they get it, they make a decision, and they begin to tune out. So some of that late money starts to just skip off the surface is my impression.
I think that's right.
I think people are ready to vote. They've been ready for a while. The Democrats are doing this kind of trying to defy gravity thing where they're trying to double down on 4 failed years. And it's just not going to work. The only thing they have is to demonize the other side. As you mentioned, we've seen early voting numbers in record amounts. But inside of that, in our area, we're seeing Democratic early voting be sluggish compared to 2020. Overall, it's about half of what it was in 2020 in our area. But the ratio of Democrats to Republicans, and good for our side, is that it's very much improved. So in 2020, it was about 4-1 Democrat to Republican for mail-in voting. And this year, so far, it's 2-1. So every other voter who's voting by mail is Republican. And so I think that's a great trend for us, and it shows the enthusiasm is on our side, which we love.
Okay, so look at the numbers here, and I want to make sure I got these numbers right, and that these two things can be true at the same time. And then we'll move on to actual, the next voters to go. So I have here that these are ballots returned as of yesterday. So Democrats total have, we'll just round up a little bit, 1 million early voters so far locked in, 1 million. Now, that doesn't say they're voting for Kamala either, but we'll go with it, 1 million. And Republicans have just under 600,000. So you look at that and you're like, well, hold on. I mean, to your point, like 2-1, the Democrats are
Right.
like they're crushing us in early voting. But it says here the change from 2020 is Democrats are down. This can't be right. Down 700,000 votes from where they were 4 years ago on early voting.
No, that's right. Yeah, that's what we've seen in our area. It's about half. So, if you're looking at on a million down 700,000 from 2020, it's approximately, half.
What?
So it's a massive less enthusiasm. Some of that, what we don't know, and I've heard hedging by some statisticians where they're saying, well, 2020 was COVID, so some of this we may see come back at the polls for Democrats. But I think any other hedge is, well, for Republicans who are now voting through early voting or through the mail, they may have already voted. They would have voted anyway. So it's not new voters. It's high propensity. But I will say there are percentages, and I've seen them, at the polls for these early voting locations. There are some first-time voters there who have, they're registering to vote. They're voting. They're coming out of the woodwork. So I think even if it's a small percent, 6%, 8% of new voters, first-time voters, like that's big. We'll take it.
Wow, that's amazing. And now every time I've looked at early voting numbers, I kind of like stop after a minute or two because it's like, oh, and then once I finally make sense of the numbers, then I look at the fact that there's a bunch of independent voters as well. And you're like, oh, well, I mean, it all comes down to who they vote for.
That's right.
And there's 203,000 of those who have voted so far. The New York Times wrote an article, where is it here? Donald J. Trump has improved his standing in Pennsylvania. Okay, good. Even as late deciding voters appear to be breaking for Kamala Harris. I don't really know how both those things can be true. If you would think if the late deciding voters were breaking for Harris, that'd be good for her and bad for Trump, but I don't know how, right? But what have you seen in your neck of the woods outside Pittsburgh of late deciding voters?
Well, so first on the trend towards Trump, I mean, we've seen this in poll after poll. I think statewide, Trump is up a couple points now, whereas a few months ago, he was down a couple points. And these are just polls, right? But it's to some extent it's the only tool we have. I believe that just like in 2016, that there's a lot of Trump underpolling that occurs. So I think there's always a fudge factor there where he's probably doing a little bit better, which is encouraging for us in Pennsylvania. And interestingly, some of the registration trends in our area, in the Pittsburgh area in particular. Think kind of Appalachia, these working class, traditional Union Democrats have started to re-register. For a while, they were just voting with us in bigger numbers, and we knew about that phenomenon. But now, for this cycle, for the first time, we're seeing increased registrations in these areas, which are traditionally union Democrats, long, standing Milltown folks, they're re-registering as Republicans. And, so in Beaver County, which is a big part of our district, for the first time this year, we go to the polls on Election Day with more Republicans than Democrats, and that's a really big deal. So these late breaking, I think there are still some people, as hard as it is to believe, who are maybe not making a decision about who they want to vote for, who they like, but whether or not they'll get to the polls. I think a lot of this is about turnout and enthusiasm. And so that's why you're seeing these dueling rallies in Pittsburgh. Even today, we've got dueling rallies between Harris and Trump.
Can you vote in Pennsylvania today or no?
So you can no longer vote at an early voting facility, but you can turn in your mail-in ballot at a drop box location, or you can go to the county office building and early vote. But really, tomorrow's the big day, so we're telling people come to the polls tomorrow. We'll have locations all across the district. So tomorrow's the Super Bowl.
Yes, that's right. Okay, so twofold question here. First, how are you going to get that low propensity voter to vote tomorrow? What are you physically going to do? Because at this point, I don't even know. I couldn't imagine not voting. So I don't know what the person is who's busy tomorrow or whatever and doesn't feel like this is important enough. So what are you going to possibly do to get them to actually stand in line? And by the way, stand in line for a long time.
Yeah. So we know who these folks are because they're registered to vote, but it's public information that they haven't voted as often, right? So your high propensity, we're not worried about them. They're going to go out and vote. A lot of them have already voted. The low propensity, though, these are the folks who have received multiple texts, phone calls. They get mail every single day. They're being bombarded with information. What we've told our supporters is that you may not think about it, but you all know low propensity voters. It's your next door neighbor. It's the person in your kindergarten line when you're headed to school to drop your kid off. It's a family member, right? Because there are a ton of low propensity voters. In the last election cycle, 2020 presidential, turnout was really, really strong, but it was 80%, right? It wasn't 90 or 95%. It was 80%. In last year's election, which we had a county executive race and some local races, judicial, it was 17%, right? So there are, voters all over your neighborhood, in your family. And so we've tried to take that approach that we all know these local propensities and you can think about them. Think about that neighbor who's out raking leaves. Go talk to him and say, hey, why don't you come to the polls with me? We're doing the traditional way too, where we have lists of people who haven't turned in their mail ballots or haven't gotten the polls, and we'll call and we'll text. But at this point, we've probably called and texted them probably a dozen times already. So now we're reaching out to those personal relationships and let's get folks to the polls.
That's good. What is your advice to the people who are planning on voting tomorrow and getting ready for the lines to be, and maybe some chaos and madness as well? Yeah.
I think I heard you kind of talk about this at the beginning. Let's commit to it. This is the one thing that we can do, to continue our great republic. We had and have had generations before us who have given so much. Our founders pledged their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. This is what we can do. We can each stand up and make sure that our voice is heard and is counted. And if anybody doubts that their individual vote matters, like this election is the election where your individual vote really, really matters. This thing is going to be razor thin for the state of Pennsylvania, across the country, at the top of the ticket. We've got Dave McCormick running a great Senate race against Bob Casey. That's going to be close. I'm running against Chris DeLuzio here, who is a progressive legislator who needs replaced, and that's going to be a close race. So we just need everybody to turn out, take it seriously, do your part, and let's go win. That's my pitch.